Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 4th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Then Jesus, filled with the power of the Spirit, returned to Galilee, and a report about him spread through all the surrounding country. He began to teach in their synagogues, and he was praised by everyone. When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And then he began to say to them, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Grace and peace to you from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. Last week in my sermon I spoke about the glory of God revealed in Christ. And there's lots and lots of layers to all of this stuff that we understand or don't understand about God and the Spirit and Jesus and Trinity and all of that. But one of the aspects of God's glory, as I kind of explained it last week, that's something that's worthy to be praised, something that's worthy to be lifted up or admired, some great accomplishment. It doesn't quite apply to God, but part of God's glory is revealed in some of the characteristics and the nature of who God is, and some of those things that we come to know about who God is. And one of those characteristics of God that we speak about occasionally, that's one of those kind of churchy words, is the word faithfulness. We praise and thank God for his faithfulness. So what is faithfulness? I feel like I'm teaching a class on theology over the last couple Sundays, but nevertheless, what is faithfulness? And that word may bring to mind to you something along the lines of trustworthiness, or someone you can count on, or we have people in our life that we consider to be faithful, right? A friend that you call, or a family member that's always there, regardless of the circumstance or the situation. Even better, when things aren't going great, you need those faithful friends or family members that you can call in the middle of the night or at the last minute and ask a favor of them, and you know they're going to show up, right? I mean, that's faithfulness. In human terms, it's a very valuable thing. It's something that we admire in folks, and frankly, it's something that maybe some of us actually strive for. We all have flaky friends. Those are the ones that you call and say they're going to pick you up at the airport, and they don't show up, and you never call them again. You only get one chance for some of those things. But we stick close to those people because they're important to us. And we always need sort of a helping hand. Well, at some point in our life, we're going to need a helping hand in some way. But the faithfulness of God is completely different, not surprising, than how we see the faithfulness in people. This is one of our problems. Well, I'll just speak for myself. One of my problems, maybe you're all different, that we tend to define our relationship with God in terms of our relationships with and experiences with human people in this world. It's not. None of you are like a God. Neither am I. You all should be very happy about that. The faithfulness of God is something completely and utterly different. When we are the faithful friend or family member of somebody, we don't do it completely without some benefit for ourselves. It's not completely idealistic or holistic in the way that we do things. We benefit from those things, right? Bless you. It's always good to sneeze in church, because then you get blessed and it's extra special. We may think that the acts of faithfulness are completely selfless, but the reality is they're not. They help us to maintain friendships. Some of us might think a tit for tat, that one day you might remember that time that I helped you move, and then when I need your help, I can call in that favor. We may be mostly selfless, but in every single one of us, because of our nature of being imperfect human beings, there is a selfish component to everything that we do. Even if it's just a tiny bit selfish. Being faithful to somebody helps us to maintain a friendship, right? That's a benefit to us. We like to have people in our lives that are friends and stay close to folks. So there is a motive for us to do all those things. With God, faithfulness has nothing to do with that. God has nothing to gain from us. God has nothing to benefit. The benefits in no way by being faithful to anybody or anything. God does it simply because God is faithful. And the story that Vicky read from the book of Nehemiah, raise your hand if you knew there was a book called Nehemiah in the Bible. It's one of those books that we read once every 3 years in church as part of the lectionary. Other than that, it gets completely ignored. But it's an important book. As opposed to most of the Old Testament prophetic books, it's one of the 2 books that takes place after the return of the Israelites from exile in Babylon. There's some of, from a chronological perspective, some of the, they detail and narrate some of the last events in the Old Testament era, before the silent period of the last 400 years before Christ. Nehemiah was, as it said in that reading, the governor, and Ezra, his partner, was the priest. That when Darius, the Persian king, returned, not Darius, I forget his name. The Persian king sent the Israelites back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, to rebuild their city, to rebuild their way of life. And he supported it, and he provided the funds for it and protection, sending back the people who had been exiled back into Jerusalem to do all of this, to restore the people. The people that went back were very, very unlikely alive when they were exiled. They were exiled for a period of 70 years or so. In biblical terms, that's almost 2 generations. So the people that went that were any older than 5-10 years old. There may have been some 90-year-olds in that group that went, but almost none of them would have remembered what life was like in Jerusalem. It would have been something completely foreign to them, and something that the old people told stories about. Oy vey, if you only could have seen the temple. It was so magnificent, and our worship and our way of life was so much different. You think about a 70-year period and how life changes. It's hard to think back that far, but think about it from the perspective of the people who had not ever known that. All of those that were born in Babylon. And so when they're going back to the temple, they're encouraged by Nehemiah and Ezra to rebuild the walls and to rebuild the temple and to kind of restart the way of worship, which, if that was never a part of your life, you're like, why are we doing this? I mean, it seems kind of pointless. And it's a lot of work. Building walls without machinery, without cranes and tractors, and that would have been really, really hard work. Plus you add in the fact that the surrounding nations and the enemies, the old enemies of Israel, who were super stoked that Israel was destroyed by the Babylonians, when they come back, they're just harassing them non-stop and making it even harder for them to do what they were being encouraged to do. And were being, fulfillment of prophecy for what God had said would take place. It was really, really hard. That's just a really general idea of what's taking place. But the particular story that we read was one about the book of the law, the book of Moses. So they were all gathered together, and when they were trying to do all this rebuilding stuff, these were people that were not familiar with the practice of the law, at least in terms of how it took place in the life in Jerusalem, which was centered around worship, sacrifice, and all of the things that took place in the temple. That no longer took place, and over the course of those 70 years, it was like, the law. They kind of forgot about it. They weren't practicing it because they were living amongst a foreign people in an unclean land. It was impossible to do that. So it just kind of fell by the wayside. And as they came back, it occurred at some point to the priest and to the governor, these two, that, you know what we need to do to inspire the people is to break out to the book of the law. Is to remind them of who we are and who God is and of the promises of God. And so they had a copy of the Torah. They had a copy of the book of Moses, the law. And they gathered all of the people together to read and hear the stories of Moses and of the book of the law and of God and of the covenant. And a lot of things must have come to mind for them. First, the nostalgia of what had taken place and what all of those people that had since died had told them about the way of life in Jerusalem, and perhaps told them about who this God was. Told them stories from the prophets, told them the story of Abraham, told them the story of Noah and his ark, of Adam and Eve, and King David and his descendants, and over again. And one of the things that must have come to mind to them was, goodness gracious, we were exiled into Babylon because our people, our leaders, our kings violated the law of Moses. They broke the covenant. And the covenant is the basis of the relationship that God has with his people always. Starting with Noah and going through Abraham and going through Moses and going through David and some other minor sort of covenants of God saying, I'm going to be your God and you'll be my people. And here are some of the requirements of that. You are going to be on the receiving end of incredible blessings by having me as your God. I am the great and almighty and one and only God, more powerful than all other non-existent gods, whatever. You'll benefit by me being your God. And it's unmitigated grace that I'm offering this to you. And here's a way that you should, sort of behave and respect what I have done for you. And if you don't, there's going to be consequences. That was part of the covenant with Moses. In some ways, that was part of the covenant that God made with David. That there would always be a king on the throne ruling over Israel. But if they decided that they didn't need to obey the book of the law, there was going to be consequences and discipline. And so the people probably heard, wow, we got sent to Babylon and our city was destroyed, not because God gave up on us or put on his promises, but because of the things that we did. But also hearing about the great things that God had done in the reading of that book of the law, about the Exodus, about the faithfulness of God through all generations of the people of Israel. That when God makes a promise, it will never be broken. And if something goes awry, it doesn't happen according to your standards, it's not because God has forgotten, or God has forsaken, or God has given up, or God has changed his mind. It may be because the people quit on their end. They decided to worship other gods. They decided to forsake God. They gave up on justice and equity and compassion and mercy and grace and hospitality and all of the things that God stood for, that they were to represent to the rest of the world. And as a result of that, discipline was going to come, or God was going to withhold the benefits of being in a covenant with him because they weren't holding up their end of the bargain. Sometimes it's just the chaos of life. Sometimes there are circumstances that take place that have nothing to do with people being unfaithful, and certainly nothing to do with God being unfaithful. But say again you had a friend who was going to pick you up at the airport, and on the way to the airport their engine blew up in Pasadena on their way. Well, the problem wasn't with them. The problem was something blew up, and they had no control over it. And the people are hearing about the faithfulness of God. And that is literally what one of the things that the entire Old Testament is about. God saying, I'm going to do this. God does that. The people saying, we're going to do this. And then they don't, and God says, well, I'm not going to do that. But over and over again, God doing things on behalf of the people, out of his generosity, out of his grace, to the benefit of those people, not because God needs to be praised or given credit for it. That's not who God is. God is all of those things, whether we acknowledge or praise or think about God in those terms. But it is a story after story after story of God always being there, of God remembering his promises. And as the people in Nehemiah's day heard about what was taking place, in what was going to be happening in their midst, that God was restoring them. God was bringing them back. God was fulfilling the prophecies that had been spoken by the people, by the prophets of their day, by the Isaiahs and the Jeremiahs, who at the end of their books were giving hope to people who were living in Babylon, saying, God's going to do this because of who God is. And now they're hearing it. Now they're living it. Now they're experiencing it. They're living in the faithfulness of God. And their hearts were lifted up, and they fell on their faces and worshiped God because they recognized the faithfulness of God and how blessed they were. The prophets had spoken for God to the people, and it was coming true. And it was coming true in their midst. That's what prophets do. That's what prophets did. And God proves his faithfulness to people through the fulfillment of those prophecies. And that's what Jesus was talking about in that story in Luke, as he stood up in the synagogue in this Epiphany moment for those people at that time in Luke's gospel, immediately after his temptation in the desert. This is Luke recording his first, not miracle, but his first revelation of him being God. He was fulfilling a prophecy, a messianic prophecy. And that's what he told the people when he said, what you're hearing me read, I am that person. I am the anointed one. I am the one who is going to liberate, to give sight to the blind, to release the captives, to break the chains of the oppressors. And at first the people were like, yay! I think next week's gospel will tell a different story. I'm pretty sure our follow-up to this is the remainder of that story, because it cut off in the middle of it. Jesus was an example of God's faithfulness, because throughout the Old Testament, from the time of the monarchs, especially from the time of King David and onward, he had promised he was going to send him a king. And he was going to be one that was going to be from David's line. And he would sit on the throne and reign for all eternity. And it was taking place. It was happening right in their midst as they experienced Jesus standing up and reading this. The problem was their expectations. What they wanted God to do. Because one of the aspects of the faithfulness of God is not that he does what we want him to do. God is the sovereign God. God does what God's going to do and is unchanging. And that's what makes God perfectly faithful. If something happens in our life or in our world or doesn't meet our expectations, it's not because God failed us. It's because of a number of things. We misunderstood, we misinterpreted, we had false expectations. We believed that something was going to take place that we were never promised. And part of the faithfulness of God is you have to think about, what has he promised to us? What has God said is going to take place? What are the expectations that we can have? Not that we'll always get what we want. Somebody wrote a song about that. That's not who God is, and I've said this a number of times. If it was, that's the way that the relationship between us and God worked, that we always got what we wanted. If we just prayed in Jesus' name for whatever, that we would get it, then God's no longer God. God is our servant. He is our slave. He is our genie. He's our Santa Claus. He is not our God. Sometimes just this world and the chaos that we live in that brings those very difficult moments in our life and the struggles that we face. It's not a result of God's failures. It's a result of living in a broken world. What God promises us are things like salvation. And his faithfulness shown to us on the cross exemplifies that. He promises us joy in terms of our relationship with God. That being our strength. As it was written in by the prophet Nehemiah. He promises us peace. He promises us hope. But he also promises that in this life we will face trials. Jesus said that. It came from his very own lips. In this life you will face trials. But he also said, do not fear, for I have overcome the world. The faithfulness of God as proven to us through the prophets, through the writings of Scripture, and most definitely through the fulfillment of prophecy through Jesus Christ and the promised Messiah, that faithfulness becomes a stronghold for us, becomes that rock on which we stand. Because nothing else in this world can be counted on. They say death and taxes. Death, yes. Not so sure about taxes. God is the only thing that is 100% faithful in everything. And he is the stronghold. He is what we hold fast to in the midst of a chaotic world that we live in. And imagine a world without that. Without God having proven himself faithful over and over and over and over again. To always be there, to always be present, and to be faithful in his love and his grace, and the full measure of joy and peace and hope and all of those things. That's who God is as a faithful God. Dependable. 100% of the time. Not our genie, but our God. And one to whom we cling when all else fails. Praise be to God that he is faithful in all things, in all times, and in all places. And then when he says he's coming back again, hallelujah, praise Jesus. He could come back today. I'd be okay with that.